It started as just another mystery lost in the cold silence of space. Hundreds of years ago, before humanity had spread across the stars, a massive colony ship called Artemis Dawn was launched from Earth. It carried thousands of people, scientists, engineers, families, and dreamers on board. Their mission was simple: find a new home among the stars and build a better future. For months, everything went according to plan. The ship traveled through deep space, sending back updates to Earth regularly. But then one day the signal stopped. No distress call, no warning, just silence. Every tracking station across the human colonies searched for them, but Artemis Dawn had vanished completely. At first, people thought maybe a system failure had caused communication loss. Others believed pirates or an asteroid field had destroyed the ship. But as time passed, no trace was ever found, not even a fragment of its hull floating in space. Eventually, it was declared lost. 12,000 souls were gone, swallowed by the unknown. The story of Artemis Dawn slowly faded into legend. Generations passed. Humanity grew stronger, spreading across galaxies and building the Galactic Confederacy, a powerful alliance of human colonies. But in the corners of history books, a few old researchers still whispered about the lost colony, wondering what really happened to those people who had once dared to go so far. Centuries later, the galaxy had changed. New wars had been fought, new worlds had risen and fallen. Most people had forgotten about Artemis Dawn. That is, until one quiet morning in the year 2497, at an observatory on the edge of the Confederacy, a group of technicians were monitoring long-range signals. Their work was routine. Most days they just recorded data from distant stars and space dust. But that morning, one of them noticed something strange on the monitor. It was a faint pulsing signal. It didn't match any natural pattern. It was artificial and old. The technician ran a quick scan. The data showed something unbelievable. The signal's origin was a small red dwarf system nearly 900 light-years away from the frontier rim. That region had been marked uninhabitable long ago because of radiation storms and unstable gravity waves. No one lived there. No one could live there. And yet the signal was clearly human. At first, they thought it was a malfunction. But then, as they cleaned up the data, words began to appear in the decoded stream. It wasn't random static. It was a message, transmitted in a very old Terran encryption pattern, something not used since the 2300s. The scientist froze as the translation came through. The message said, "We are alive. We do not recognize your authority. Stay out of our system." For a long moment, no one spoke. The observatory director ordered a double check, then a triple check. But the message remained the same. It was real. Someone, or something human, was out there, claiming independence from the Confederacy. When the discovery was reported to Central Command, it caused a storm. Some believed it was an elaborate hoax, maybe a pirate broadcast or a glitch in an old relay. Others feared it might be something worse, an unknown human faction using forbidden technology. But there was one possibility that no one dared say aloud at first. Could it be them? Could it be the descendants of Artemis Dawn? The Confederacy decided to send a small scouting fleet to investigate. 5 ships equipped with long-range communication relays, hyperspace drives, and diplomatic teams. The mission was to find the source of the transmission, make contact, and identify who had sent it. It took several months of travel before the fleet reached the coordinates. What they saw shocked everyone on board. The system wasn't lifeless at all. The moment their ships exited hyperspace, scanners lit up with readings, power grids, orbital platforms, shipyards, and 3 fully developed planets. The central world was covered in oceans, forests, and cities. Massive space stations orbited it like guardians. The readings showed energy outputs far beyond what any known human colony could produce. It was a complete civilization, thriving, organized, and advanced. The scouts sent a greeting message announcing peaceful intentions on behalf of the Galactic Confederacy. But before they could even finish, a response came. It wasn't warm or welcoming. A clear voice transmitted across every channel. "You were told to stay away. You are trespassing in Dominion space." The name Dominion confused the crew. None of the known colonies used that title. The diplomatic envoy replied calmly, requesting dialogue. But before they could begin, their lead ship's sensors detected something alarming. A massive energy surge from one of the orbital platforms. Seconds later, the entire crew watched in disbelief as a gravitational distortion appeared near their formation. Space itself seemed to twist and fold. One of their battleships, armed, shielded, and fully functional, was suddenly crushed as if invisible hands had gripped it from all directions. The vessel disintegrated without a single explosion, its atoms scattering into space dust. The remaining ships immediately retreated to safe distance. They had just witnessed technology far beyond anything the Confederacy possessed. The message from the Dominion came again, cold and final. "We do not seek war, but we will defend our system. Leave now." The fleet had no choice but to withdraw. The loss of a battleship was devastating, but the discovery was even greater. The crew knew what they had found. A lost human colony evolved into something completely new. When the news reached the Confederacy Council, disbelief spread like wildfire. Debates erupted across human space. How could an isolated colony lost for centuries have reached such a level of power? And how had they survived in a system once thought deadly? Investigations soon uncovered fragments of old records about Artemis Dawn. The ship's planned destination matched the same sector where the signal had been detected. Historians pieced the puzzle together. The lost colonists had somehow survived, adapted, and built a civilization of their own. But how did they become so advanced? The Confederacy sent probes and deep scans toward the Athelian system, as the Dominion called it. What they found hinted at a discovery that defied logic. Beneath the system's central planets ran an energy field unlike anything known. A dark matter vein that interacted with gravity itself. Somehow these colonists had not only found it but learned to control it. Without interference from governments or wars, they had turned isolation into innovation. They had no one telling them what they couldn't do. They had no limits. Over generations, they built technology capable of manipulating the laws of physics. Among the Dominion people, stories said their ancestors had survived the early centuries through sheer unity and discipline. They valued knowledge, strength, and independence above all. Their society had grown around the idea that humanity's greatest enemy wasn't alien species or cosmic dangers. It was stagnation. To them, the Confederacy represented exactly that, a symbol of control and decay. When the Confederacy demanded diplomatic recognition, the Dominion refused. To them, the old Earthborn government was irrelevant. They had become something else, an evolved branch of humanity, self-made and self-ruled. As debates raged across the galaxy, ordinary people watched in awe. Some admired the Dominion's courage, calling them the proof of humanity's limitless potential. Others feared them, warning that such power could easily destroy everything if misused. Inside the Dominion, life was different from the rest of human space. Every citizen grew up knowing the story of Artemis Dawn. It wasn't just history. It was a sacred reminder of who they were, the survivors who refused to die. Their technology was built not for luxury, but for strength and defense. Even their ships carried designs inspired by the original colony vessel, sleek, efficient, and heavily shielded. Though advanced, they were not cruel. Their warning to the Confederacy wasn't a threat, it was protection. They had seen what unchecked empires did to smaller colonies. They wanted peace, but peace on their own terms. After the first encounter, the Dominion sealed their borders. No ships were allowed to enter their space again. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't the end. The galaxy had just been reminded that humans were not all the same, and that somewhere, hidden for centuries, a part of humanity had grown stronger than anyone could imagine. The people of the Confederacy began to whisper again, just like their ancestors once did. Only this time the legend wasn't about a lost ship. It was about a new power rising in the shadows. A power born from the same human spirit that once looked at the stars and decided to chase them, no matter the cost. And so, what began as a faint signal from the edge of space became a turning point in galactic history. The lost children of Artemis Dawn had returned, not as refugees or wanderers, but as masters of their own destiny. They had no interest in ruling others, but they would never bow to anyone again. The Confederacy realized too late that the age of quiet human unity was over. A new chapter had begun, one written by those who had once been forgotten, but who now commanded the power of a star itself. As the stars shimmered over their reclaimed world, the Dominion watched the universe with calm, steady eyes. To them, the message was simple. Humanity was never meant to be confined. Not by empires, not by distance, and certainly not by fear. The news about the mysterious human colony spread across the Confederacy faster than light. In every spaceport, classroom, and communication channel, people were talking about the Dominion, the lost descendants of Artemis Dawn who had somehow survived and built a whole new world far beyond known space. At first, many people didn't believe it. How could a colony cut off for centuries build such advanced technology? Some called it a lie created by the government to distract citizens from growing political problems. Others believed it was real, saying it proved what humanity could achieve when left alone and free. Inside the Confederacy Council chambers, things were far from calm. Leaders argued day and night. Some wanted peace and communication, hoping to open dialogue and learn from the Dominion's technology. Others demanded control, fearing that such power in the wrong hands could destroy everything humanity had built. In the middle of all this debate, one thing was clear. No one understood the Dominion. They appeared, sent a warning, showed a terrifying weapon, and vanished again into silence. Every attempt to contact them was ignored. The Athelian system remained closed, hidden behind an invisible barrier of gravity storms that no ship dared to cross. Months passed. The Confederacy tried sending probes again, but they were either destroyed or pulled off course by strange energy waves. Scientists couldn't explain it. Whatever technology the Dominion had, it could bend the laws of physics themselves. Still, humans are curious by nature, and curiosity, combined with pride, is a dangerous thing. The Confederacy decided to form a special research mission, led by some of its most respected scientists. Their goal was simple: to understand how this lost colony had survived and where they got their energy source. They believed if they could study it, maybe they could match the Dominion's power. The mission quietly began, away from the public eye. Advanced stealth ships were built using the best cloaking systems available. Their plan was not to fight, but to watch. They wanted to slip into the edge of the Athelian system, gather data, and leave without being noticed. For a while, everything went as planned. The fleet reached the outskirts of the system and began scanning. The readings amazed everyone. The amount of energy flowing through that system was beyond anything ever recorded. It was like the entire region was alive, gravity shifting in rhythmic patterns, almost breathing. But the moment they tried to send the first signal back to base, something strange happened. The entire communication network froze. The screens went dark. Then a calm, steady voice filled every ship at once. "You were warned. We see you. Leave now." The voice wasn't angry, it sounded controlled, almost disappointed. The ships tried to retreat, but their engines refused to start. Gravity fields around them twisted, locking them in place like invisible chains. One by one, their systems began to fail. Before panic could spread, the same voice spoke again. "We do not harm without cause. You may leave this system if you remember this lesson. Curiosity without respect leads to destruction." Then, in an instant, all power was restored. The ships were pushed, literally pushed, out of the system by a wave of gravitational force. No explosion, no violence, just a quiet reminder of who held the real power. When the fleet returned, the scientists were shaken. They described the experience as both terrifying and humbling. The Dominion hadn't destroyed them, even though they easily could have. That restraint, that control, it said more about them than any weapon ever could. Back on Earth and across the colonies, public opinion began to shift. People started to see the Dominion not as enemies, but as something almost mythical. They were no longer just the lost colony. They had become symbols of human evolution, people who had survived impossible odds and built their own destiny. Still, the Confederacy's higher councils didn't share that admiration. To them, any power beyond their control was a threat. Secretly, they began preparing for conflict. Research stations were ordered to study gravitational fields. Engineers worked day and night to design new weapons that could stand against what the Dominion had shown. But the more they tried, the more frustrated they became. Every experiment failed. Every attempt to copy the Dominion's power led to disaster. It was as if the universe itself rejected their imitation. Meanwhile, deep within the Athelian system, life went on peacefully. The Dominion's cities were unlike anything in the Confederacy, built in harmony with nature and energy fields that kept the environment perfectly balanced. No pollution, no overcrowding, no poverty. Each person had a role. and knowledge was valued above wealth or politics. Children grew up learning about their ancestors, the passengers of Artemis Dawn, who had faced starvation, disease, and isolation but never gave up. Their story was told in schools, engraved in monuments, and passed down in every home. They didn't see themselves as heroes. To them, survival was simply duty. Every generation carried the same belief. Humanity's true strength came not from conquest but from adaptation. They didn't need empires or leaders demanding loyalty. They believed in unity through purpose, not power. That belief made them strong. It also made them cautious. They watched the Confederacy closely, knowing how greed and fear had destroyed human civilizations before. Inside the Dominion Central Council, the leaders discussed the growing tension. They knew war was coming, not because they wanted it, but because the Confederacy could not accept their independence. Some members argued for complete isolation, to seal the system and cut all external communication. Others believed contact was necessary, to prevent misunderstanding from turning into bloodshed. After long debate, they agreed on one thing. If humanity outside their system was to survive its own arrogance, someone had to show them a new path. But they wouldn't preach. They would demonstrate, so a plan was formed. The Dominion would reveal their existence to the galaxy, not through weapons but through an act of creation. Months later, the Confederacy's outer colonies began picking up strange signals. Giant space objects were forming near the Athelian border, metallic structures the size of moons. At first, military commanders panicked, thinking it was an invasion fleet. But when the images became clearer, everyone was left speechless. The Dominion was building new suns. By using their dark matter energy technology, they were literally crafting stable miniature stars to bring light and warmth to dead systems nearby. Entire solar systems that had been abandoned centuries ago were suddenly glowing again. It was a message more powerful than any speech. We do not conquer, we create. People across the Confederacy were amazed. Even the most skeptical leaders couldn't deny what they saw. The Dominion had taken control of a solar system, not for war, but to give it life. But instead of calming tensions, this display only deepened the Confederacy's fear. They saw it as proof that the Dominion could reshape the galaxy itself. If they could make stars, they could also destroy them. So plans began for something darker, a full-scale military operation. Secret meetings were held, fleets were gathered, and weapons that had never been tested were prepared. The mission was simple: to contain the Dominion before they became unstoppable. However, what the Confederacy didn't understand was that the Dominion already knew everything. Their sensors could read fleet movements across light years. They could see the war coming long before the first ship was launched. Instead of preparing to fight, the Dominion did something no one expected. They sent a message to every human colony, every planet, every station across the Confederacy. It wasn't encrypted or threatening. It was clear and simple. We are not your enemies. We are what you could become if you choose unity over control. The universe is vast. There is room for everyone. We only ask that you let life grow, free and unbound. The message was broadcast everywhere, from the poorest mining outposts to the capital's central tower. People listened in silence. Some cried, others cheered. It touched something deep in the human spirit, a reminder that power wasn't always meant to dominate. Sometimes it was meant to protect. The Confederacy leadership tried to block the transmission, but it was too late. The message had spread faster than they could censor it. Across the colonies, protests began. Citizens demanded peace talks. Scientists pleaded to work with the Dominion, not against them. For the first time in centuries, humanity stood divided, not by hate, but by hope. In the Athelian system, the Dominion watched quietly. They didn't celebrate, nor did they threaten. They simply waited, knowing that humanity had reached a turning point. Whether the galaxy chose peace or war was no longer in their hands. The once-forgotten descendants of Artemis Dawn had done what their ancestors could only dream of. They had changed the destiny of humankind not by force, but by example. As their artificial suns glowed across nearby systems, lighting up the dark corners of the galaxy, the message behind it became clear to all who saw it. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its weapons or governments. It was its will to rise again. No matter how lost, no matter how far from home, and somewhere, deep within the Athelian capital, an old recording from Artemis Dawn still played in a quiet hall. It was the voice of one of the ship's early captains, recorded before they vanished from Earth centuries ago. The words were simple but powerful. If we are ever lost, may those who come after us remember. We were never running away from humanity. We were trying to become its best version. The galaxy had changed ever since the Dominion revealed itself. What was once just a mysterious lost colony had now become the center of every conversation, every political debate, and every late-night broadcast across human space. The sight of new suns being created by human hands had inspired billions of people, but it had also terrified the ones in power. Inside the grand halls of the Galactic Confederacy, tension grew with every passing day. The message from the Dominion still echoed in everyone's mind. We are not your enemies. We are what you could become. It was meant as a message of peace, but the leaders of the Confederacy didn't hear it that way. To them, it was a reminder that they were no longer the strongest. The council gathered for an emergency session. Military officers, scientists, and governors from dozens of planets filled the room. Some wanted to open talks, saying the Dominion could teach humanity things that could benefit everyone. Others, mostly the older generals, demanded immediate action. They saw the Dominion's actions, especially creating suns, as a show of dominance, a quiet warning that no one could match their strength. In the end, fear won. Plans began for what they called Operation Veil. It was a secret mission, an attempt to break through the Athelian system's defenses and plant stealth probes near the Dominion's worlds. The Confederacy wanted to know how their technology worked, how they drew energy from dark matter, and what weapons they possessed. If they couldn't match their power, they at least wanted to understand it. Dozens of scientists were recruited in secret. New ships were built with the latest stealth drives. Every detail of the plan was hidden, even from most of the council members. On the surface, the Confederacy spoke of peace, but behind closed doors they were preparing for war. Meanwhile, life within the Dominion continued in quiet strength. On their homeworld, the people didn't think of themselves as superior. They simply believed they had found balance between technology and nature, between mind and spirit. Children were taught from an early age that progress without purpose was meaningless. They learned that true power came from creation, not destruction. The Dominion's leaders, known collectively as the Circle, watched the outside galaxy carefully. They knew the Confederacy was restless. Their observers had detected unusual energy spikes along the border, signs of new ships gathering. They weren't surprised. To them, fear was the most predictable part of human nature. Still, they didn't want conflict. The Circle decided to open one more path for peace. This time they would send an envoy, a single ship carrying representatives to speak directly with the Confederacy. It would be their first physical contact in centuries. When news of this plan spread through the Dominion, reactions were mixed. Some feared it was too risky. Others said it was necessary, to show the galaxy that the Dominion didn't hide behind its strength. The ship chosen for the mission was called Orion. It was small but graceful, shaped like a winged seed, powered entirely by the energy that flowed through their system. As Orion left the Athelian system, people across the Dominion watched the sky, silently hoping that this time peace would be possible. Days later, the ship appeared at the edge of Confederacy space. The moment it entered, hundreds of scanners locked onto it. The Confederacy's military was already on alert. Fleet commanders surrounded the ship, demanding identification. The crew of Orion replied calmly, transmitting a message that stunned everyone who heard it. We come not as rulers, not as threats. We come to talk as humans. The Confederacy allowed them to land on a neutral space station orbiting a mining colony. The meeting that followed would later be known as the encounter at Lyra Station. When the Dominion envoys stepped out, people were surprised. They weren't aliens or mechanical beings as some had imagined. They looked completely human, yet there was something different about them. Their movements were calm, their eyes focused, as if they carried centuries of patience within them. The discussions began peacefully. The Dominion spoke of unity and coexistence. They offered to share knowledge that could heal dying worlds, restore damaged ecosystems, and create sustainable energy sources. Their only condition was simple: The Confederacy had to stop its expansion into uninhabited systems and allow planets to develop naturally without exploitation. For a brief moment, it seemed peace might actually be possible. Some members of the Confederacy Council even began to believe in their sincerity, but not everyone trusted them. Far away, the generals overseeing Operation Veil decided to act while the talks were still ongoing. They believed the peace talks were a distraction, a way for the Dominion to buy time. So while the envoys spoke on Lyra Station, the stealth fleet quietly slipped toward the Athelian border. At first, everything went smoothly. The ships passed through the gravitational fields without detection. They reached the outer edge of the system and began deploying probes. The scientists were amazed by the data they collected. Energy readings were off the charts, beyond anything they'd ever seen. They sent the information back to their base with excitement. But then something unexpected happened. Every system on every ship suddenly froze. The engines shut down. The communication links went silent. Outside the windows, space itself began to ripple, like a calm lake disturbed by a single drop of water. A faint glow spread around them, and then a voice filled the air, not through speakers, but directly in their minds. You broke the trust that was never offered. You came as shadows when we came in peace. Within seconds, the ships were gone, not destroyed, simply removed. Later, Confederacy sensors would find them floating far beyond the border, intact but powerless. The crews were alive but shaken, unable to explain how they had been moved across light years in an instant. When the news reached the Confederacy Council, chaos followed. Some demanded retaliation, others called for surrender. The Dominion, on the other hand, didn't respond with anger. Their envoy, still on Lyra Station, simply stood before the council and said, "We warned you not because we feared you, but because we understood you. Fear makes you destroy what you don't understand. We will not let humanity destroy itself again." After that, they left. Their ship vanished into hyperspace, heading back home. In the days that followed, strange things began happening across the galaxy. Systems that had once been quiet suddenly received signals, patterns of light, music-like frequencies, and holographic projections showing ancient moments from human history. The Dominion had released a message not through words, but through stories. It showed the early struggles of humanity, the wars, the greed, the pain, and then the rebirth of the Artemis Dawn survivors who chose to rise above it. It wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. People watched in awe. For many, it changed everything. Miners on remote worlds stopped their shifts just to listen. Children on star stations gathered around screens. Even soldiers paused their training to witness it. The message spread faster than any propaganda or threat ever could. The Confederacy tried to block the broadcasts, but it was no use. The people had already seen it. Protests broke out across colonies. "Let them speak," they shouted. "They are us." For the first time in centuries, ordinary humans began questioning their own leaders. What if the Dominion was right? What if power and control had blinded them from what truly mattered? Meanwhile, in secret, the Dominion prepared for the possibility that peace might fail, not because they wanted war, but because they understood it might come whether they wished it or not. The circle met again, discussing the next steps. Some wanted to cut off contact entirely, to let the outside worlds fight among themselves. Others believed they still had a duty, to guide humanity toward balance even if from afar. At the same time, strange gravitational readings began appearing around nearby systems. It was as if invisible walls of energy were forming, separating certain regions of space. When Confederacy scientists investigated, they discovered that these energy barriers were stable, protecting planets and ecosystems from mining and overuse. It was as though the Dominion was quietly healing the galaxy, one system at a time. The military saw it as a form of control. The people saw it as salvation. Over time, smaller colonies began reaching out directly to the Dominion, bypassing the Confederacy's government. They sent messages asking for help with droughts, failing crops, and dying stars. To everyone's surprise, the Dominion responded. They sent aid, energy pulses to revive fading suns, technology to clean oceans, and data on how to rebuild ecosystems. They never asked for anything in return. Slowly, the image of the Dominion shifted from being a threat to being a symbol of hope. But in the hearts of the Confederacy's ruling class, That hope only deepened their fear. They knew that if the people truly believed in the Dominion, their own control would crumble. And so deep in the shadows, a final plan began to take shape, one that would test the true limits of the Dominion's patience. Far beyond the border, in the dark silence of space, massive fleets began to gather, not for exploration, not for peace, but for a war they thought they could still win. What no one yet knew was that the coming confrontation wouldn't just decide the fate of two civilizations. It would decide what kind of humans would shape the galaxy's future, the ones who feared power or the ones who used it to protect life itself. And somewhere within the Ethelian core, the Dominion scientists watched them up. The warning signs were clear. Every sensor, every observatory, and every quiet whisper across the galaxy pointed toward one truth. War was coming. The Confederacy's leaders could not accept a power greater than their own existing beyond their control. The Dominion's technology had terrified them. They had tried to study it, copy it, even secretly steal it, but nothing worked. Their ships failed, their scientists grew frustrated, and their citizens had begun to admire the Dominion openly. To the rulers of the Confederacy, that admiration felt like a threat. So a final decision was made in secret chambers filled with long arguments and cold silence. They called it Operation Dawnfall. Their goal was to destroy the Dominion's power before it could spread any further. It wasn't just about control anymore. It was about pride. The Confederacy could not allow history to remember them as the weaker humans. Over the next few months, fleets began to gather at the edge of the Ethelian border. Massive warships, carriers, and battlecruisers filled the black sky. Thousands of soldiers trained for a mission they didn't fully understand. They were told the Dominion was dangerous, that its technology could one day enslave all humans. But deep down, many of them weren't sure. They had seen the messages the Dominion had sent, the ones that spoke of peace, unity, and protecting life. Still, orders were orders. On the other side of the border, the Dominion watched quietly. They had known this moment would come. Their sensors had tracked the buildup for weeks. They saw the fleets, the energy spikes, the weapon testing, but instead of preparing massive defenses or calling for panic, they remained calm. The Circle, the ruling council of the Dominion, met in their great chamber, a place where the walls glowed softly with the energy of the system itself. Each member stood around a table made of crystal, which projected holograms of the approaching fleets. They spoke in steady voices, their expressions more thoughtful than afraid. One of the council members broke the silence. They will come because they fear what they don't understand. We cannot stop that fear, but we can choose how we answer it. Another replied, if we fight like them, we become them. There was a long pause. Then the council's decision was clear. They would defend themselves, but they would not strike first. Their goal wasn't victory. It was to show the galaxy what strength truly meant. As the day approached, the galaxy held its breath. The Confederacy's fleet began its advance, stretching across space like a moving wall of light. On every ship, alarms echoed and engines roared. The soldiers tightened their gloves, checked their weapons, and waited for commands. When they reached the outer edge of the Ethelian system, their scanners showed nothing. No defense ships, no planetary shields, no response at all. The system looked quiet, too quiet. Some officers grew uneasy. It's a trap, they whispered. But the commanding generals pushed forward, determined to prove their power. As they entered the first orbit, their sensors began to distort. Gravity itself seemed unstable. Readings flickered. The stars stretched, twisted, and then snapped back into place. Still the order came, attack, dozens of missiles launched. Energy beams shot through the darkness. For a few moments, the sky burned brighter than a sunrise. But then something strange happened. The missiles vanished. Every single one of them simply disappeared mid-flight. Not exploded, not deflected, gone. The same happened to the laser fire. It was as if space had swallowed the weapons whole. Then the Dominion appeared. From the blackness, thousands of small ships emerged, glowing softly with blue light. They weren't built for war. They looked more like works of art, shaped like flowing metal, moving as smoothly as water. They surrounded the Confederacy fleet in silence, forming a giant circular formation. The soldiers stared at their screens, confused and afraid. The Dominion ships didn't fire. They didn't even move closer. They just hovered there, forming what looked like a barrier of light. A voice came through every channel at once, calm, steady, and deeply human. You were told to stay away. We offered peace. We asked for understanding. Yet here you are bringing fire where there was life. The commanding general shouted into the comms, "Stand down your fleet or we will open fire." But before he could finish, his ship's systems began to fail. Lights dimmed. Gravity fluctuated. The crew floated from their seats as the ship's engines went cold. One by one, the entire Confederacy armada lost power. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, and all drifting in silence. Outside, the Dominion ships began to glow brighter. The light grew stronger, wrapping around the frozen fleet like a giant sphere. No one knew what was happening. The soldiers braced for death, expecting to be destroyed, but destruction never came. Instead, they heard the voice again. "We will not harm you, but you will see what your fear has done." In an instant, the entire fleet was surrounded by visions, not on their screens, but in their minds. They saw flashes of Earth's past, the wars, the greed, the endless cycle of conquest. Then they saw the journey of Artemis Dawn, the desperate colonists, the struggle for survival, the hope that built the Dominion. They saw what humanity could become if it learned to rise above pride and control. When the visions faded, silence filled every ship. Many of the soldiers were crying quietly. Others just sat in disbelief, unable to speak. Then the Dominion's voice spoke again. "Go home. Tell them the truth. Tell them what you saw." The glowing light faded and power returned to the ships. Engines came alive. Systems rebooted. The fleet was free to leave. Not a single ship had been harmed. The Confederacy's generals were furious. They had come to destroy, but instead they had been spared. They saw it as humiliation, but the soldiers who had witnessed the vision felt something different. They had seen humanity's reflection, both its darkness and its potential. When the fleet returned, chaos broke out across the Confederacy. The soldiers' stories spread quickly. People listened to them in awe. "They didn't fight us," one soldier said during an interview. "They showed us who we are." Public protests exploded across major worlds. Citizens demanded peace. They wanted the government to stop the war and open talks with the Dominion. The Confederacy leaders tried to control the narrative, calling the Dominion manipulative and dangerous, but the truth had already spread too far. Meanwhile, the Dominion withdrew completely from galactic communication. Their systems went silent. The borders closed. No more messages, no more appearances. It was as if they had stepped back into the shadows. But they were watching. Within the Athelian system, the Circle gathered again. They had stopped the war without firing a single shot. Yet they knew this wasn't the end. The human race had been shaken but not yet changed. Fear might return. Ambition might rise again. One of the elders spoke softly. "They have seen light, but they still live in shadow. We cannot force them to evolve. They must choose it themselves." So, the Dominion made a quiet choice. They began sending small energy signals to dying systems, reviving stars, rebuilding destroyed planets, and helping life grow again where it had been lost. They didn't announce it. They didn't take credit. They just acted. Across the galaxy, people began to notice miracles. Planets that had been declared dead now showing signs of life. Suns burning brighter. Space stations suddenly restored to full power without explanation. The Confederacy tried to deny it, but everyone knew. The Dominion was healing the galaxy in silence. And yet the greatest change wasn't in technology or stars. It was in people. The soldiers who had faced the Dominion started movements of peace, teaching others what they had learned. They called themselves witnesses of the light. Their message was simple. Power is not meant to rule. It is meant to protect. Even some Confederacy leaders began to question their old ways. Slowly, without bloodshed, without conquest, the Dominion had begun to reshape humanity's heart. On a quiet night in the Athelian capital, an old historian stood on a balcony overlooking the glowing cities. He gazed at the sky, where distant stars shimmered like tiny fires. He whispered to himself, "Centuries ago, we were the ones who vanished. Now it is we who have become the reminder that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, humanity can still find light." The Dominion didn't celebrate victory, because to them, this was never a war. It was a test, one humanity had almost failed, but perhaps learned from. As their artificial suns burned softly in the distance, lighting forgotten worlds, the Dominion continued their silent work, not to rule the galaxy, but to guide it quietly from the shadows. They had no flags, no empire, no need for control. What they had was purpose. The same purpose that had kept the passengers of Artemis Dawn alive through the centuries. The belief that humanity was not meant to conquer the stars, but to understand them. And though the galaxy still whispered their name with awe and mystery, the Dominion no longer needed to be seen. Their message had already been written, not in words, but in the living light of 1,000 reborn worlds. Months passed after the Great Confrontation, but the galaxy had not returned to normal. The event that people now called the Day of Light had changed everything. No one could forget what they saw, or what they felt. Across the Confederacy, people began to question their leaders. The old belief that power came from control started to fall apart. Ordinary citizens wanted truth. They wanted peace. They wanted to understand what kind of humans had built the Dominion and why their message felt so right. On Earth, the great capital cities were filled with debates. Holoscreens showed endless discussions between politicians, scientists, and spiritual leaders. Some called the Dominion angels of progress. Others warned that they were manipulators using advanced technology to play with human emotions. But deep down, the people who had witnessed the event knew it wasn't a trick. They had felt something no machine could fake. It was as if the Dominion had touched a part of their humanity they had long forgotten. The Confederacy government tried to keep control by spreading fear. They called the Dominion a threat to free will, claiming they wanted to weaken human strength. But the more they spoke, the weaker their words sounded. For the first time in history, people were no longer afraid of something stronger. They were inspired by it. Small movements began to rise. They called themselves the Witness Circles. These were groups of people who had been part of the fleets or had lost family in the war preparations. They gathered not to plan revenge, but to talk about peace, understanding, and rebuilding. They didn't follow leaders. They followed the idea that humanity could become better, kinder, if it learned from the Dominion. The Confederacy didn't know how to respond. Every time they tried to silence a witness circle, 10 more appeared in different cities. Meanwhile, far beyond the political centers, scientists and explorers began to study the strange energy signals appearing around dying stars. Entire star systems that were thought to be collapsing suddenly stabilized. Planets with no atmosphere began to show signs of life. It was subtle. A spark here, a cloud of oxygen there. But it was real. When the first scientists confirmed it, they couldn't believe their own data. "It's like someone is repairing the galaxy," one of them said quietly during a broadcast. "Someone is healing it." People began to suspect the truth. Even though the Dominion had disappeared from sight, their touch could still be felt. They were working in silence, not for power, not for glory, but to keep life alive. The idea spread like light through dark space. In time, the Confederacy's structure began to break apart. Worlds that had been forced under central control declared independence. Old rivalries started to fade as people focused on rebuilding. The galaxy was changing not through war or law, but through the quiet influence of one hidden colony. And yet, while the surface of humanity seemed calmer, something deeper was happening behind closed doors. Inside the Confederacy's secret research divisions, a new project was underway. A few of the old leaders, too proud to admit defeat, were desperate to find out how the Dominion's technology worked. They had recovered fragments of damaged ships, pieces of material that defied known physics. They called their secret mission Project Eclipse. The goal was to create a weapon that could match the Dominion's gravitational power. But the scientists working on it soon realized the risk. The energy they were trying to control was not like anything they had seen before. It responded to human thought, emotion, and even intention. One of the scientists, an older man who had once served in the first expedition to Athelion, warned them, "This isn't just technology. It's consciousness. If you use it with hate, it will destroy you." His warning was ignored. The leaders wanted results. But before the project could go further, something unexpected happened. Every computer in the research facility suddenly shut down. Lights flickered. Gravity fluctuated slightly and then stabilized. When power returned, a single message appeared on every screen. You cannot use what you do not understand. The project was immediately halted. The leaders were furious, but they couldn't explain how their systems had been breached. They had no contact with the Dominion and no signals, no ships, and yet somehow, the message had reached them. It became clear to many that the Dominion was still watching, not interfering, but making sure humanity didn't destroy itself again. Meanwhile, on the outer edges of the galaxy, explorers began to pick up faint transmissions in the same ancient frequency used by Artemis Dawn centuries ago. The signals weren't messages, and they were coordinates. When scientists followed them, they found structures floating in space, giant rings of light orbiting dead suns. Each ring contained a single inscription in simple Terran language: learn before you build. The rings became symbols of humility and hope. Pilgrims began to visit them, leaving messages of peace or small gifts, not out of worship but out of gratitude. They believed the Dominion had placed them there as reminders. As time passed, a new generation was born, a generation that had never known the fear of the old Confederacy. They grew up hearing stories of the Day of Light and the hidden humans who had shown the galaxy what peace truly meant. To them, the Dominion wasn't a myth. It was proof that humanity could change. Schools began teaching a new kind of history, one that didn't glorify conquest, but honored survival, cooperation, and growth. Even the old Confederacy planets began to change their systems. Many worlds formed their own councils, focusing on sustainability and equality instead of power and profit. But not everyone agreed with this path. Some believed humanity was becoming too soft, too dependent on the Dominion's influence. They wanted strength, expansion, and dominance again. They were few, but loud. They believed the Dominion's silence was weakness. They formed a group called the Restoration Front. Their mission was to rebuild the old Confederacy and prove that humans didn't need anyone's guidance, not even from the enlightened Dominion. While the rest of the galaxy moved toward peace, this small group began preparing in the shadows. They didn't know it, but their actions would soon draw the Dominion's attention once more. On the other side of the stars, deep within the glowing heart of the Athelian system, the Dominion watched the growing changes carefully. The circle met again in their great chamber. The room was quiet, filled with a soft hum of energy from the dark matter core that powered their cities. One of the younger members spoke. "The galaxy is changing faster than we expected. They are learning, but a few still cling to their old ways." An elder nodded slowly. That was always the danger. Change without wisdom can turn light into shadow. They decided not to interfere directly. Instead, they sent out a subtle energy pulse across nearby star systems, a signal that could only be felt, not heard. It reached the hearts of sensitive humans, those with open minds and peaceful spirits. These people began to dream of stars, of voices whispering about balance, unity, and compassion. Some woke up crying, saying they felt as if they had been touched by something divine. Others started building new communities that followed these visions, not in worship of the Dominion, but in the belief that humanity could rise again, stronger and kinder. The galaxy slowly started to glow with hope. Trade routes reopened peacefully. Former enemies began to cooperate. The idea of one shared humanity began to spread from planet to planet, but the Restoration Front continued to work in secret, developing stolen technology and gathering weapons. They believed that when the time came, they would confront the Dominion again, not out of fear, but out of pride. Back in the Dominion's capital, the Circle knew what was coming. Yet they didn't prepare weapons. Instead, they prepared messages. Messages meant not to destroy, but to awaken. They believed that if the final confrontation ever happened, it should end with understanding, not blood. The Dominion's true goal was never to rule or conquer. Their mission had always been the same: to help humanity remember who it was meant to be. One night, as the twin moons rose over the shining towers of Athelian Prime, a quiet voice echoed through the city's vast communication network. It wasn't a command or a warning. It was a simple reminder. We were once lost. We were once afraid. But we found peace not by taking, by giving. The galaxy can do the same. The message spread across the stars. People stopped what they were doing just to listen. Some cried. Some smiled. Some simply stood in silence, feeling something awaken inside them. The Dominion didn't appear. They didn't send fleets or diplomats, but their words were enough. In that moment, across countless worlds, humans looked up at the sky, and for the first time in centuries, they didn't see it as a battlefield. They saw it as home. Years had passed since the galaxy first heard the name Dominion. What began as fear had turned into wonder, and what started as mystery had become legend. Children grew up hearing bedtime stories about the lost humans who disappeared into the stars and returned stronger, wiser, and kinder. People no longer looked at the sky with fear of invasion. They looked at it with curiosity and hope. But peace, as history often showed, never stays untouched for long. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, the group known as the Restoration Front had grown stronger. They believed that humanity was losing its power, that compassion made them weak. They saw the Dominion not as saviors, but as obstacles to human dominance. Using old Confederacy technology and secret archives, they built ships, massive dark vessels equipped with weapons fueled by unstable energy sources. Their leader, a cold and ambitious commander, told his followers, "The Dominion took our pride. We will take it back." While most of the galaxy was focused on peace and rebuilding, the front prepared in silence. They trained soldiers, developed new weapons, and learned how to manipulate energy fields similar to what the Dominion used, though theirs were unstable and dangerous. It was only a matter of time before they decided to act. One cold morning, deep space observatories near the edge of the Athelian border detected massive energy spikes. The readings were unlike anything seen since the Day of Light. At first, scientists thought it was a natural event, maybe a pulsar storm or a solar flare. But soon the truth became clear. The Restoration Front was marching toward the Athelian system. News spread quickly across every inhabited world. People panicked. Some prayed. Others tried to contact the Dominion for help. But as always, the Dominion remained silent. No response. No movement. No ships. It felt as though they had vanished again. In the capital city of Earth, debates turned into chaos. The Galactic Council called emergency meetings trying to decide what to do. Some wanted to intervene and stop the front before they reached Athelion. Others argued that humanity should stay out of it. But before any decision could be made, something incredible happened. As the front's fleet entered Athelian space, their communication systems failed. Every ship began to lose power. Gravity warped. Time itself seemed to slow down. The soldiers inside felt weightless and confused. Then, one by one, their ships stopped moving. A voice echoed in their minds, calm, steady, human. "Why do you bring war to the place that gave you peace?" The soldiers froze. Some dropped their weapons. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried warmth and sadness. Outside, the dark space around them began to glow. From the distance, thousands of shimmering lights appeared, slowly moving closer. The Dominion had returned, but this time they looked different. Their ships no longer carried the sharp blue light that once marked their power. Instead, they glowed with a golden hue, gentle, almost like sunrise after a long night. The Dominion didn't fire. They didn't threaten. They simply surrounded the invading fleet and held them still in space, wrapped in a quiet, powerful field of light. Then, the voice spoke again. "You built weapons to fight your own kind. You used fear to feel strong. Have you not learned?" The Restoration Front's commander, filled with pride, shouted into his communicator even though it barely worked. "You talk of peace while hiding behind power. You're no better than the Confederacy." There was a long silence. Then the voice replied softly, "Power is not the enemy. The heart that misuses it is." Suddenly, holographic images filled every ship. Soldiers saw flashes of their own memories, their homes, their families, the faces of people they had left behind. Some saw their children. Others saw the destruction caused by past wars. The commander saw himself as a young boy, standing in the ruins of his childhood home, watching the Confederacy soldiers march through. He remembered the fear, the anger, the pain that had turned him into what he was now. Tears rolled down his face, though he didn't understand why. Then, something unexpected happened. The Dominion didn't destroy the fleet, they released it. The light faded, and the ships began to drift freely again. The weapons stopped working, but the engines returned to life. The commander stood still for a long moment, staring at the glowing Dominion ships outside his window. Then he gave the order that no one expected. Stand down. Across hundreds of ships, soldiers lowered their weapons. Silence filled the void. The Dominion ship slowly pulled back, creating a path for the fleet to leave. But before they departed, the commander heard the voice one last time. You are not our enemy. You are our reflection. Learn from what you fear and you will never need to fight again. And then the Dominion vanished. Just like that, the Restoration Front returned to known space in silence. When they arrived, they didn't bring war. They brought stories. Stories of light, visions, and the strange peace they felt in the presence of the Dominion. Something had changed. The commander, once filled with hate, disappeared from public view. Some said he retired to a quiet colony to live the rest of his days in peace. Others said he went back to Ethelion to seek forgiveness. Whatever the truth was, his decision ended what could have been the final war of humanity. After that day, the Dominion reappeared, not as rulers, but as teachers. They began sending envoys to different planets, not in warships, but in small craft that emitted healing light. These envoys looked human, descendants of the Artemis Dawn. They spoke softly, listened more than they talked, and helped civilizations rebuild what centuries of conflict had destroyed. They taught new ways to grow food using energy, new ways to travel through space without harming nature, and new ways to live in balance with technology. They called their philosophy the path of harmony. Everywhere they went, they reminded people that peace wasn't a gift, it was a choice. Slowly, humanity began to unite again. Not under one government or one flag, but under one shared understanding that they were all part of something larger. The galaxy changed. Trade became fairer. Planets that had been poor for generations were rebuilt with Dominion help. There was no control, no domination, just quiet cooperation. And in time, the Dominion began to fade once more, leaving behind only what was necessary. They didn't want worship or power. They wanted freedom for all. One day, many years later, a young student on Earth was studying old records about the lost colony of Artemis Dawn. He turned to his teacher and asked, "Why did they hide for so long? Why didn't they come back sooner?" The teacher smiled softly and replied, "Because we weren't ready to listen." That simple answer stayed with the student forever. He grew up to become a historian and traveled to the outer colonies to study the legacy of the Dominion. On one of his journeys, he visited a small moon near the edge of Ethelion space. There, hidden among the rocks, he found something extraordinary, a monument carved in crystal. It was ancient, glowing faintly with energy. The words written on it were simple. "We did not leave Earth to escape humanity. We left to remember it." He stood there in silence for a long time, the light reflecting softly on his face. In that moment, he understood what the Dominion had truly been trying to do. They weren't gods. They weren't conquerors. They were reminders, proof that even when humanity falls, it can rise again. Centuries later, their story became more than history. It became a lesson, a story told to every new generation, of how a lost group of humans found strength in unity, compassion and peace, and somewhere far beyond the known stars. The descendants of the Artemis Dawn still watched quietly, not as rulers, but as guardians of hope. They no longer needed to show their power, because the galaxy finally understood their message. The stars shone brighter that night, as if the universe itself had taken a deep breath and finally found calm. The age of conquest had ended. The age of understanding had begun.